20 years ago, a ruthless millionaire kicked his wife out after finding out she was pregnant with someone else, he thought. Broken and sterile, he believed she betrayed him, until one rainy afternoon, he sees a young boy crying at her grave. What the boy says will shatter everything he believed for 2 decades. Before starting the story, make sure to subscribe the channel so that you don't miss any update in future. He hadn't cried in 20 years, until he saw a boy weeping at her grave. A boy who shouldn't exist. Edward Grayson, billionaire, sterile, stone-hearted, never imagined he'd return to that old cemetery. But something about today pulled him there, and what he saw shattered his soul. The sky hung heavy with clouds as Edward's black Bentley slowed near the graveyard gates. The air felt thicker than usual, like the world was holding its breath. He wasn't sure what brought him back after 2 decades. Maybe guilt, maybe loneliness, or maybe something unfinished. 20 years ago, he buried more than just a memory here. He buried her. Marissa, his ex-wife. The woman he had kicked out of his mansion, out of his life, out of existence, all because she'd told him she was pregnant. Right after doctors had confirmed he was sterile. He never asked twice, never listened. He assumed betrayal. He signed the divorce papers, shut the doors behind her sobbing face, and never looked back. Until today. As he walked through rows of forgotten names and weathered stones, he didn't expect the grave to hit him so hard. The marble had her name, but also a single line beneath it. She loved purely, even when unloved. And there, kneeling before it, was a boy, no older than 10 or 11. Tears streamed down his face as he held a withered rose. His hands were trembling. His eyes were swollen. And he whispered something under his breath that froze Edward's heartbeat. She said he wasn't ready to love, maybe one day. Edward stepped closer, the crunch of gravel under his expensive shoes making the boy turn his head slowly. Those eyes, they were Marissa's. Same soft brown, same quiet storm. "Are you her son?" Edward asked, his voice dry like paper. The boy stood up slowly. He didn't flinch. He just nodded once. "Yes, sir." Edward felt a sharp pain shoot through his chest. It wasn't a heart attack, it was truth. "But that's impossible." His voice cracked. "I can't have children," he whispered. The boy tilted his head. "She told me you didn't believe her." Then added something even more painful. "But she always believed in you." Edward stepped back, dizzy. This wasn't real. Couldn't be. He remembered every detail of the fight. Every word he threw like daggers. How he said she was a liar. How he called her disgusting. How he watched her walk barefoot into the rain, pregnant, without looking back. He told himself for years. She cheated. She lied. She wanted money. But now, looking into this boy's face, none of that made sense. Not anymore. "Do you live nearby?" Edward asked, barely managing to speak. The boy shook his head. "No. I live with Mr. Dalton. He was her landlord. He takes care of me now." Dalton. Edward blinked. That name struck something. James Dalton, an old friend of Marissa's. A quiet painter. Always respectful. Suddenly, a question rose in his throat like bile. "Did she ever tell you about me?" His voice trembled like a boy asking if God remembers him. The boy nodded. "She said you were strong, but scared." He wiped his eyes. "She said you had a storm inside you, but she loved your storm. She said maybe, one day, you'd see the sun again." Edward's knees gave in. He sat on the damp grass beside the grave, tears fighting their way out for the first time in 20 years. He had everything. Money, power, legacy. But he never had this. Never had his son's first steps. Never had Marissa's smile when she held their baby. Never had the chance to say, "I'm sorry." He looked at the boy. "What's your name?" The boy smiled faintly. "Eli." The name hit him like thunder. That was the name he had suggested once, in passing, years ago, when he and Marissa still believed in dreams. She remembered. She kept it. He whispered, "She named you after what I wanted." Eli nodded. "She said it was your name. You gave it meaning." And then he reached into his small backpack and pulled out a photo. Old. Torn. It was a picture of Edward and Marissa, young, in love, arms wrapped around each other under cherry blossoms. Marissa's handwriting was on the back. "For Eli, when you're ready to meet your father." Edward's breath stopped. She had known. She had forgiven. Even in the face of betrayal, she prepared her son to meet the man who destroyed her, with love, not hatred. Eli looked at Edward one last time before turning to leave. "I have to go now. Mr. Dalton's waiting." Edward blinked back tears. "Wait, can I see you again?" The boy paused. "You'd have to ask him. He said if you ever showed up, he has something to give you." Edward stood, stunned. What could Dalton possibly have, after all these years? And just like that, the storm inside him had only just begun to rage. Edward meets the man who raised his son and receives the letter that destroys him. Rain began to fall as Edward stood frozen in front of the grave, Eli's fading footsteps echoing in the silence behind him. His heart was racing not with fear, but something worse. Regret. It gripped his chest like a vice. 20 years. 20 years wasted chasing boardrooms, building empires, and silencing the only voice that ever truly cared for him. And now, the son he never knew had walked away. But there was one thread left: James Dalton. Edward's car sped through winding roads, splashing through puddles, until it stopped in front of a modest brick house nestled between dying trees. It was the kind of house where real life happened, where meals were made from scratch, where laughter echoed through thin walls, where broken hearts were quietly mended. He hesitated before knocking. The door opened before he could. James Dalton stood there, older now, grayer, but with the same calm eyes Edward remembered from long ago. "I knew you'd come," James said, as if time hadn't passed at all. Edward didn't speak. He couldn't. James stepped aside. "Come in. We've waited long enough." The house was warm. Lived in. It smelled like wood polish, coffee, and faintly of her. He saw toys in the corner. A faded drawing on the fridge that said, "Happy birthday, Mom." The pain returned, slicing through him like glass. James sat him down at a small wooden table, placing a steaming mug in front of him. He didn't touch it. "I saw Eli," Edward finally said, voice hollow. James nodded. "He visits her every Sunday? Rain or shine?" Edward swallowed hard. "He said you raised him." "No," James corrected gently. "Marissa raised him. I just stood beside her." There was silence. Then James reached into a drawer, pulled out a small wooden box, and placed it on the table. "She told me that if you ever came back, this was meant for you." Edward stared at it. His fingers trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside, folded neatly, was a letter. The paper was soft with age, but her handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, flowing, gentle. Just like her. He unfolded it slowly. His eyes scanned the first line, and everything inside him shattered. "Edward, if you're reading this, it means you finally came back." His hands began to shake. "I don't know what brought you to my grave. Maybe guilt, maybe curiosity. But if you're here, it means something inside you still lives. And I need you to know. I never stopped loving you." His throat closed. "I told you I was pregnant, and you looked at me like I was a stranger. You didn't ask. You didn't scream. You just shut the door. And even then, I waited. I waited outside, in the rain, for 3 hours, hoping you'd open the door again and ask me if the baby was yours. You never did." Edward's eyes burned. He couldn't breathe. "You believed the worst of me when I needed you to believe the best. You chose science over love. A sterile diagnosis over the woman who gave you everything." A tear fell from his cheek onto the letter. "And yet, I forgive you, because I know you were scared. Scared of being vulnerable. Scared of not being enough. Scared of being broken. James sat silently, watching him break. Our son, yes, your son is named Eli. He has your stubbornness, your fire, and your eyes when you laugh. I told him about you. I told him you were brilliant and strong and deeply human. And I told him you made a mistake. But that doesn't make you a bad man. Edward's face was soaked in tears now. He had built towers, bought governments, broken competitors, but he had never felt smaller than in this moment. I wanted him to grow up loving you, even if you never returned. Because hate is a curse I couldn't pass on. Not even to the son of the man who left me in the cold. Edward couldn't read anymore. His vision blurred. His heart was breaking open in a way he didn't think was possible. James gently placed his hand over Edward's. She wrote that a month before she passed. She had cancer. She didn't want to tell anyone. Said she didn't want to be a burden. Edward looked up in shock. Cancer. James nodded. She knew she didn't have much time. But even then, she refused treatment. Every dollar she had went to raising Eli. She worked nights, painted portraits, cleaned houses. She never touched a penny from the divorce. Edward's head dropped into his hands. He wanted to scream, to destroy something, to rewind time. But all he could do was cry. I was going to give her everything, he whispered. I had lawyers draft a letter years later. I couldn't send it. James watched him quietly, then said, She didn't want your money, Edward. She wanted you. Silence wrapped the room like a blanket. Finally, Edward looked up. Does Eli know? Some of it, James replied. Not all. He doesn't know how badly you hurt her. Just that you were once important to her. Edward wiped his eyes. Can I be in his life? James paused, then said something that pierced like a blade. That's not for me to decide. Edward nodded slowly. Of course. It was too late for permission. But maybe not too late for redemption. Just then, the front door creaked open. Small footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. Eli entered, clutching a wet umbrella, backpack slung over one shoulder. He froze when he saw Edward. James looked between them, then stood and gently touched Eli's shoulder. Why don't you show him the painting, son? Eli blinked. The one Mom finished before she died? James nodded. Eli ran into the next room and came back holding a wrapped canvas. He placed it on the table and pulled off the cover. Edward's breath caught in his throat. It was a painting of him and Marissa, laughing, under cherry blossoms, the same day as the old photograph. Except this one had something extra. A boy, Eli, painted between them, holding both their hands. Edward stared at the canvas, broken beyond repair. She had painted a family that never got to exist, but one she had dreamed of till her very last breath. And that dream was now looking straight at him, with his mother's eyes, and his father's storm. Edward attempts to connect with Eli, but guilt is a heavy ghost, and forgiveness isn't free. Edward couldn't take his eyes off the painting. It felt like a punch to the soul, not just because it was beautiful, but because it was impossible. 3 smiles, 3 hands holding each other, a moment that never happened, but one she dreamed about until her final breath. He didn't know how long he stared at it. Time had lost all shape. Eli just stood there, quietly, watching him, like a ghost watching the man who haunted his mother. Finally, Edward cleared his throat. His voice was dry. Did your mother paint this? Eli nodded. The week before she went to the hospital. He paused. She said she wanted to remember something that never happened, but should have. Edward looked at the boy, really looked at him. He wasn't just a child. He was a living echo of love, of mistakes, of everything Edward had been too blind to protect. I don't deserve to be here, Edward whispered. Eli didn't argue, didn't offer comfort. He just asked, then why are you? The room went still. Edward took a deep breath. Because I saw you crying at her grave, and something inside me broke open. Something I locked away a long time ago. Eli stayed silent. Edward continued. She was the only person who ever saw me for who I was. Not the money, not the power, just me. And I didn't trust her. I didn't trust love. His voice cracked, and now I have nothing but old stones, lost time, and a boy I never got to meet. Eli blinked. You didn't come back when she was alive. The words landed like bullets. Edward closed his eyes. I was a coward. I told myself you weren't mine, that she had lied. I believed doctors over the woman who held my soul. Eli's hands were clenched now. I watched her cry at night, he said softly. She used to hold that picture of you too. Sometimes she would whisper your name. She never hated you, you know. That hurt worse than if she had. Edward sank into the chair. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve to know you. But I want to try. I want to be something, anything, in your life. Eli tilted his head. You want to be a father now? Edward didn't answer, because he didn't know how to define what he was anymore. Not a father, not a husband, not even the man he thought he was. Do you play chess? Eli asked suddenly. Edward looked up, startled. What? My mom taught me. She said you used to play a lot. Edward chuckled bitterly. She beat me every time. Eli picked up a small travel chessboard from the shelf. One game. That's all. Edward hesitated, then nodded. All right. They sat across from each other. Black and white. Past and future. Two players on a battlefield of regrets. For the first few minutes, neither spoke. Eli moved with confidence. Edward watched in awe. The kid was good. Not just good, strategic. She taught you well, Edward said. Eli shrugged. She taught me how to think 10 steps ahead. Said life's just one big board. Edward smiled faintly. She always saw the game before it even started. Midway through the game, Eli spoke again. You know, I used to imagine what it'd be like to meet you. Edward paused. Eli continued. Sometimes I thought you'd be rich and kind. Sometimes I thought you'd be mean. But most times, I just thought you'd never come. Edward's heart clenched. I'm here now, he said. Eli's expression didn't soften. You can't undo 20 years with one game of chess. I know, Edward said. But I can start by not walking away again. Silence. Then Eli made his move, checkmate. Edward stared at the board. Well, I'm still terrible at this. Eli cracked a small smile. Just for a second. Then it was gone. I'm not promising anything, Eli said quietly. But if you want to come next Sunday, we go to her grave after breakfast. Edward looked up, stunned. You'd let me come? Eli shrugged. She would have wanted that. Those words, she would have wanted that, were more than an invitation. They were a chance. A small, fragile window of hope. Edward nodded slowly. I'll be there. As he stood to leave, he turned back to James, who had been quietly watching the whole time. I owe you everything. James shook his head. You owe it to him. And her. Edward nodded, then looked at Eli one more time. Can I leave something with you? Eli didn't answer, but he didn't say no. Edward reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it slowly. Inside was a chess piece. The queen, gold-plated, beautifully crafted. She gave this to me when we first met. Said I needed to learn how to protect the queen if I ever wanted to win. He placed it in Eli's hand. She's yours now. You already know how to protect her better than I ever did. Eli looked down at it, then nodded once. And for the first time, Edward felt something lift from his chest. Not all of the pain, not the guilt, but just enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to learn how to be a father. One last visit, one final truth, and a choice that could rewrite a broken legacy. The following Sunday, the sky was clear, a rare blessing in that part of town. Edward stood outside the little brick house again, dressed not in a tailored suit, but in something simpler. Humble, quiet, almost Human. His heart thumped against his ribs like a warning bell. But he didn't run. This time, he knocked with hope, not expectation. The door opened, and there was Eli, already wearing his small coat, hair still a little wet from the shower, and that same guarded look in his eyes. "You're early," Eli said. Edward nodded. Didn't want to risk being late. Eli glanced back at James, who stood a few feet away. James gave a soft nod. "All right," Eli said. "Let's go." The car ride was silent, but not uncomfortable. Edward didn't try to fill the space with words. Sometimes, silence speaks the loudest. At the cemetery, Eli led the way. He walked with purpose, as if the path to her grave was etched into his bones. Maybe it was. Edward followed, every step heavier than the last. When they reached her tombstone, Eli knelt and placed a new flower beside the old ones. He whispered something under his breath, a prayer, a secret, maybe just her name. Edward didn't ask. Some moments belong only to the heart. He stepped closer. This time, he didn't flinch. He looked at the grave and spoke softly. "I'm sorry, Marissa." The wind picked up, brushing through the trees like her spirit moving past him. "I should have come sooner. I should have believed you. I should have protected you." His voice cracked. "You spent your life defending me, even after I destroyed yours. You deserved better." Eli didn't look at him. He just stared at the name on the stone. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "She used to write letters to you. Every year. She kept them in a box. I haven't read them." Edward turned to him. "Where are they?" "I'll give them to you." "But not yet." "Why not?" "Because I need to know something first." Edward stood still, waiting. Eli looked up, his voice firmer than ever. "Why do you want to be in my life?" "Really?" Edward breathed in slowly. "Because you're all I have left of her. And more than that, you're a part of me. I don't want to rewrite the past. I can't. But maybe I can write something new. With you. If you'll let me." Eli stared at him, measuring the weight of those words. Then he said, "If I let you in, you don't get to leave again." "I won't," Edward promised. "Even if you hate me, even if it takes years. I'll be here. Every Sunday. Every phone call. Every missed chess game. I'll be there." Eli didn't smile. But something changed in his eyes. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the beginning of it. They stood in silence again, letting the wind speak for them. Then, slowly, Eli reached into his jacket pocket and handed him a key. Edward looked at it, confused. "What's this?" "It's to her old art studio. I haven't been there since she passed. She told me she left something there. For you." Edward's fingers wrapped around the key like it was gold. A final gift. From beyond the grave. They left the cemetery together. This time, walking side by side. Back at the studio, the air was thick with dust and memories. The space was small, cracked windows, faded walls, and canvases stacked in every corner. But it breathed her. It was her. Eli didn't go inside. He waited at the door. Edward stepped in, his shoes crunching softly against the old wood. The scent of turpentine and rose perfume lingered like a ghost. He walked slowly, touching the brushes, the sketches, the unfinished dreams. And then he saw it. A single envelope, taped to a canvas. His name on the front. Just Edward. No bitterness. No blame. Just him. He opened it with trembling hands. "My love, if you found this, then some part of you is still alive. Not the man who wore suits and ruled towers, but the man who held my hand under cherry trees and whispered stories into my ear. That man still exists. I believe it. And if he's reading this, then I want to tell him something I never got to say." Edward's hands shook. His throat tightened. "You didn't betray me. You hurt me, yes. But betrayal is giving up on someone forever. You never stopped existing in my heart. So how could I ever give up on you?" He sank onto a stool. His heart wasn't beating anymore. It was screaming. "I dreamed of a life we never got to live. I painted it. I told Eli about it. I kept you alive, even when you thought you were dead to me. Not because I was weak, but because loving you, even in silence, made me stronger. Tears streamed down his cheeks. I leave you now with two things: a son who still has space in his heart for you, and a choice: build something real or return to the empty castle you once called home. But if you choose him, Edward, don't ever stop choosing him. Not when it gets hard. Not when he reminds you of me. Especially then. There was no ending, just her name, Marissa. Edward folded the letter and held it close to his chest. He sat there for a long time, breathing in the quiet. Then he stood up and walked out the door. Eli looked at him, waiting. What was in the letter? The boy asked. Edward smiled through the tears. A second chance. Eli didn't speak. He just turned and started walking. And this time, Edward followed. Not behind him, beside him. Maybe forgiveness wouldn't come all at once. Maybe some things would remain broken. But for the first time in 20 years, Edward wasn't running from the storm. He was walking through it, with his son. And somewhere, beneath cherry blossoms they never stood under, she was smiling. Never let pride speak louder than love. Sometimes, one moment of doubt can steal a lifetime of happiness. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it opens the door to a future we thought was lost forever. And in the end, the bravest thing a person can do is to return to the place they once destroyed and choose to rebuild it, one heartbeat at a time.